Starting us off with number 10 are the double suicides. Now this one was shared by Reddit user Suspicious Palm Tree, who said she lived in a house that was built back in the 1800s. Now being built at the time that it survived through both world wars and a lot more one of which being the previous owner's two sons committing suicide inside of it. When the user and her family moved in, they noticed strange happenings straight away. Their dog and parrots would randomly wake up from a nap and follow something with their heads like some entity was walking around. Every animal's head was following the same pattern, so clearly they were all looking at the same thing. The user's brother would never sleep in his room growing up because he claimed he kept hearing people talk to him. The user herself had her room in the attic and would have to pass through the empty second floor with their motion activated lights, but the lights would randomly just turn on during the middle of the night despite no human being around at all. I mean, we're seeing a pattern. 2 suicides. Coming in at number 9 is the overdose. Now this one was shared anonymously on Thought Catalog, and it said that the user's sister and her daughter moved into a townhouse apartment complex when the daughter was about 4 years old. Now the night they moved in, the mum ran into her daughter's room after hearing her screaming about a man who was in her room yelling at her. There was no man there despite the mum literally searching everywhere. Windows, doors, everything was locked, so the mum put her to sleep and went back to her room. The same thing continued to happen the next few days, and soon the daughter stopped sleeping there altogether and wouldn't even go into that room. One day while the two were at the playground, the mum started talking to another mum who lived at the complex, and she started talking about how scary it was that the person living in the apartment before the user's sister had died of a heroin overdose, and she had no idea that had even happened. After doing some more research, the mum found out the guy's bedroom was where her daughter's room was, so I mean, go figure, the man yelling. She managed to find a picture of him on his obituary, and when the daughter saw the photo, she ran out of the room screaming, saying that was the man. At number 8 we have the colonial house. This one was shared by XCO on Reddit, who said she used to live with 3 of her friends at this huge 1840s colonial house that had like 80+ acres of state wildlife property around it. We're talking super bougie and super colonial. Now everyone's bedrooms lined the upstairs hall, and it was on their 3rd night in the house where things got weird. Now the user heard her doorknob rattle like someone was messing around with it, and then she heard it happen to the door next to hers, and so on. The next morning she was confronted and asked why she was messing with the logs, because the other housemates had already said they hadn't touched them, but neither had the user. Brushing off, the housemates ended up doing nothing about it. A week later, the user felt this intense urge to get out of bed. She laid still in bed contemplating if a noise had woken her up or something, but at 3 AM she eventually ventured out of her bedroom, and she saw all her roommates leave their rooms and come out at the exact same time as her, all claiming they felt this huge urge to leave their beds. That's a bit creepy, I'm not gonna lie. Just imagine at 3 AM everyone just leaves their room at the same time. That's some cult ass right there. Filling at number 7 slot is the figure. This one's from Redditor Den Home 2, who said when he was around 9 or 10, he was living with his dad. The place they had was this terrace house built sometime in the 1800s, and he noticed weird things happening when no one else was in the house. Why all these haunted houses made in the 1800s? I feel like that wasn't a good time for anyone. Now in terms of strange happenings, I'm talking footsteps above them when both were in the same room downstairs. One night the user was in bed and woke up realizing their bedroom door was open despite always closing it before they slept. When his eyes focused, he suddenly saw this 7-foot tall shadow figure standing at the end of his bed, just watching him. When the figure realized the user was looking back at him, it seemed to literally disintegrate into the floor, and the door just closed by itself. Who dat know? Now at number 6 is the skeptic. This one was shared by Reddit user Tickleon, who said he lived in a house that was haunted for about 5 years. Before moving in, he was told about the paranormal activity that occurred in the house, but he sort of just brushed it off. Now the user never saw a full apparition of a ghost right in front of him, but so many things happened that he found very hard to rationalize to himself, like hearing the sound of children laughing or knocking on the doors despite him having no kids, light bulbs smashing onto the ground because they had somehow removed themselves from their metal bases, furniture moving from one side of the room to the literal middle, and so forth. But that's all cliche ghost stuff that we've heard before. He said what bothered him was that on the same day every year, 2 parts of the house would stink of the smell of something burning. You could just tell, you know when you step into an area that smells horrible and then you step out and you're like, oh, doesn't smell so bad over here. He finished his Reddit post by saying, hey, at least no dead girls coming out of TVs. Lol, I mean, yes, it could be worse. You are right there. You're not wrong. Y'all speaking facts. Coming in at number 5 are the Lynches. Now the time was around the mid-1800s, and the wealthy Luce Chase Sprague had lost her fortune and died penniless at the Sprague Mansion located on Cranston Street, Rhode Island. Fast forward to 1967, Robert and Viola Lynch decided to move into the 28-bedroom house that came with its own doll room, which I don't know why they didn't get rid of, but anyway. That's very creepy. Ghostly things would happen to the couple. Their blankets would be pulled and thrown off them in the middle of the night. They'd wake up with furniture knocked over to the side and rooms with their lights on that hadn't been used in a while, because let's face it, they do have 28 rooms, like let's be real, not all of them are in use. The couple decided to use a Ouija board to try and calm whatever was in the house, and they contacted an entity that spelled out "Tell My Story." Now in a plot twist turn of events, the entity was the ghost of Amasa Sprague, whose murdered, bludgeoned body was found near the house back in 1843. The family ended up moving away because they were like, screw that, but paranormal experts who have investigated their house since have physically seen the doll's eyes in that room moving. Unexplained lights have also been found, so I mean, let's just not move into the Sprague Mansion, shall we? At number 4 is the McPike Mansion. Alton, Illinois has been dubbed one of the most haunted places in the whole of America. In it we find the 16-bedroom McPike Mansion built by Henry McPike for his family back in 1869. Come the 1900s, the house was sold to Paul Lechinger, who used to rent the room out to different boarders, the Airbnbs of yore. Now either way, he was not given a 5-star rating because multiple boarders complained about hearing the sounds of children talking and laughing together despite children not even being in the vicinity. When Paul finally died, the mansion sat empty for 50 years before Sharon and George Ludke bought it as a passion project. But within days of moving in, Sharon noticed this ghost man that would stare at her through the window while she was out gardening. The couple also caught floating orbs on camera and doors opening on their own. Paranormal investigators claim the most active room in the house is the wine cellar. I mean, at least the afterlife know how to have a good time. I'll give them that. Filling at number 3 slot is The Man. This one comes from RagXDoll on Reddit, who said her father-in-law died in her house long before her son was born, so sadly they never had a chance to meet. After he was born though, there'd be many nights where she'd hear him laughing to himself, which didn't really strike her as odd since kids literally get amused by anything. One day though, she was just hanging up family pictures around the house, and of course the father-in-law was in quite a few of them. When her son finally saw them, he asked, "Oh mommy, why do you have a picture of the man that comes and plays with me at night?" Mind you, they'd never met and he'd never seen a picture of him before. That's kind of cute though, that like the father-in-law is just like the ghost of him is just playing with his like grandson. That's cute. Now at number 2 are The Husbands. But this one was shared by Reddit user I Most Likely Need Help, and I mean, don't we all, my friend, don't we all? Either way, they shared that their dad decided to buy a house that came with its fair share of baggage, let's just say. The woman who lived there before them had 2 husbands die on her in the house. The first hung himself in the garage, whilst the second died in bed in the basement. Now unfortunately, the user's bedroom was also in the basement, and she claimed that she felt like she was being watched 24/7. The basement also had a secret storage room behind a bookshelf that had a locking latch on it, yet every morning she'd find it open. It happened so frequently that the user would wake up in the middle of the night to lock it and still find it open the next morning. The garage was no different. The user would see light coming from under the door, but when she opened it, it would be pitch black. So where's this light coming from? The place was airtight, yet she'd still see the blades that were hanging from the roof just clangled together. Clangled? Did I just make a word up? They were clangling together, despite no draft coming in. And finally, at number 1 is The Little Girl. Now this one's from Naya, who said her and her family moved from the UK to an old beat-up house in the US. And of course, all the regular things happen, like seeing bright lights in random places around the house, hearing footsteps, etc. When Naya was 6 years old, this little girl started waking her up every night, and she would do it by dancing on her chest of drawers. Now Naya was terrified. Her mum thought she was dreaming or joking, like it was going up at this point. People working on the house even complained about their tools being moved around and the feeling of being watched. One night, a year after they moved in, one of Naya's sister's friends came over for a sleepover, and she woke up screaming, claiming a little girl had pulled her off the bed, and she literally left the house at 4 AM and refused to ever come back. After doing some digging, her mum found out that a little girl had died of asthma in the house.
Well, starting off at number 10, the Shanghai tunnels in Portland, Oregon. Portland was one of the most dangerous ports in the United States during the early 19th century, and it was the epicenter of Shanghai, a form of human trafficking. It's crazy to think human trafficking still happens today, and tunnels are still the way to do it. According to the local lore, swindlers preyed upon unsuspected men in the local salons, which were often outfitted with trap doors that deposited the victims directly into a network of underground tunnels. These men were supposedly held captive, drugged, and eventually transported to the waterfront, where they were sold to ships as unpaid laborers, aka slaves. Some worked for several years before finding their way back home. The tunnels are said to be haunted by the aggrieved spirits of the captives who died in the dark recesses behind the city. Random facts: the practice of kidnapping men to work on ships came to be known as Shanghai because the ships that were sold to were often headed to East Asia. Number 9, Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The castle-like Eastern State Penitentiary took solitary confinement to whole new levels when it was built in 1829. Prisoners lived alone, exercised alone, and ate alone. When inmates were left in a cell, a guard would cover his head with a hood so he wouldn't be seen. The prison had to abandon its solitary confinement system due to overcrowding from 1913 until it was closed in 1970. Although the forms of punishment did not get any less severe, chaining an inmate's tongue to his wrists, that's just one example, a true story. The site's one of most haunted places in America right now. Well, it welcomes thousands of visitors every year, both for its museums and annual Terror Behind the Wall celebration, which features 6 haunted attractions within the prison walls for Halloween. When you talk about an attraction inside of a prison, no thanks. Well, it was reported paranormal happenings have included dismembered laughter, shadowy figures, and pacing of footsteps. Sorry, I thought I was hearing footsteps behind me right now. Okay, I'm pretty freaked out with this one, so let's move on to the next one. So next up, number 8, we have House of the Seven Gables, Salem, Massachusetts. Now, this house did not steal its name from the classic novel. In fact, it inspired the novel itself. Salem is known for its history of the famous witch trials, and that's where Sabrina Spellman lived, but it happens to be the birthplace of Nathaniel Hawthorne, who used this 17th century house as inspiration for his famous 1851 novel, The House of the Seven Gables. Aside from its beautiful yet spooky facade, the house is surrounded by paranormal activity and ghost sightings, all based on personal experiences of staff. Every October, the house offers spooky tours as well as weekly performances of 2 plays, The Legacy of the Hanging Judge and Spirit of the Gables. Would you guys see a play in a haunted town's haunted house? Coming in hot at number 7 on this list, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. If you've read or seen The Shining, you know the feeling of this often snowbound hotel. It's the location Stephen King based his Overlook Hotel upon. It may not look like the film unless you watch the 1990s made-for-TV movie version, which, I don't think anyone has. Just walking to your room can drain you. So one stiff drink might have you seeing ghosts, or a couple kids chanting, "Red rum, red rum." Number 6, we're bringing you Red Onion Saloon, Skagway, Alaska. Established in 1898 as a brothel for miners during the Klondike Gold Rush, Alaska's Red Onion Saloon, it had a feature that set it apart from other bordellos. It used dolls to help run its business, so always a good sign, right? Well, every day 10 dolls would be placed on the bar downstairs, each one representing one of the ladies working in the upstairs room. A customer would choose one of the dolls, at which point it would lay down on the bar to indicate that particular workers were occupied. When the customers came back downstairs, the doll would be returned to her sitting position to let other potential clients know that she was available. Well, fast forward to 2019, when the Red Onion Saloon still operates as a bar and restaurant, yet the dolls are still on display, and it offers tours of the upstairs rooms, which are preserved as sort of like a mixed-shaped brothel museum. As if these dolls weren't creepy enough, there were reports of Lydia, a former madame of a brothel, haunting the site, complete with cold spots and lingering spells of perfume rafting through the walls. All creepiness aside, I'm more curious about how this place got named Red Onion. They could have came up with any other name. Well, let me know what you guys would call this in the comment section below. Give me a name. Alright, we're halfway on this list. Number 5, we got RMS Queen Mary in Long Beach, California. This retired ocean liner sailed the Atlantic Ocean from 1936 to 1967. During the first 3 3 years at sea, the Queen Mary carried Hollywood celebrities like Elizabeth Taylor. Her days as a luxurious ship were short-lived. In 1939, she was stripped of her amenities and began her second life as a Grey Ghost, a World War II troop ship. At the conclusion of the war, she was restored to her former glory and traversed the Atlantic for nearly 2 more decades. On Halloween 1967, the Queen Mary departed on her last cruise, eventually docking in Long Beach, California, her final resting place. The ship is reportedly haunted by the spirits of those who died aboard, such as the young sailor who was crushed to death by a door in the engine room and a crew member who was murdered in cabin B340. Number 4, Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast in Fall River. So this location came up on nearly every search on our quest to find this top 10 list for you guys. Well, you've likely heard of the children's rhyme Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave it to her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Well, you can not only visit the scene of that famous 1892 double homicide, you can also sleep at the Borden's home, eat their last meal, Johnny cakes of thick cornmeal pancakes and eggs, in case you were wondering, and spend the last nights in the bedroom where the bodies of Lizzie's stepmother Abigail was found. Someone who stayed there said, "I can attest, this home painstakingly furnished to look exactly as it did on the morning of the murders. Well, that will creep you right out." Better though, the 175-year-old property hosts up to 20 overnight guests, in which some of them, for some reason, it's a tradition when you go to this place, they will actually whip out a Ouija board. I mean, I'm not down for Ouija. That is a real life situation that can happen, and let alone whipping out a Ouija board in a haunted place. Finally, down to number 3 on this list, we have Crescent Hotel, Erica Springs, Arkansas. Since its construction in 1886, the Crescent Hotel has served several purposes: luxury resorts, conservatory for young women, junior college. But the strangest mark on its history came in 1937 when it got a new owner, Norman G. Baker. Baker was a millionaire inventor who decided to pose as a doctor despite having no medical training, and turned the hotel into a hospital that can cure cancer. Well, he was eventually found out and he was ran out of town, although reports say that his spirits found its way back to the site and found some otherworldly company too. The now operating Crescent Hotel is said to be haunted by at least 8 ghosts, ranging from a 5-year-old girl to a bearded man wearing Victorian clothing. 1 ghost is enough for me, never mind 8 of them, and children ghosts, I think those were the absolute scariest kind. Number 2 on this list, Heaven's Gate mass suicide site in Rancho Santa Fe. I mean, when you have the word suicide site, yeah, no thanks, not for this brown guy. The golf course strewn San Diego suburb of Rancho Santa Fe regularly makes the most expensive zip codes in the USA. So it came a stunner in 1997 when the world learned it was the home to Heaven's Gate, a cult whose 39 members drank poisoned Kool-Aid as the Hale-Bopp comet passed Earth, believing that aliens behind the comet would rupture their souls to heaven. Yeah, really weird. I'm not making this stuff up. Their bodies were found dressing in black sweatshirts and sweatpants, Nike sneakers, faces covered with purple cloth, and carrying $5.75 in one pocket. A toll of people speculated to catch a ride on the comet. And number 1, we have Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, Western West Virginia. This foreboding asylum began construction in 1858 and opened to patients in 1864. The massive structure was designed by architect Richard Andrews to maximize sunlight and fresh air. It was believed that the building itself would serve as a healing environment. It was designed for 250 people housed and 2,400 patients in crowded conditions. I mean, that's a pretty big range, going from 250 to 2,400. Patients were physically restrained and often given inhumane treatments such as the electroshock therapy and lobotomies, which was very popular back in the day. After more than a century in operation, the facility was forced to close in 1994, which, when you think about it, wasn't too long ago, within the last 30 years. And it was due to the reforms in mental health and treatment and the deterioration of the building. Hundreds of patients died during the asylum tenure, and scores of guests and ghost hunters have claimed they're seeing shadowy figures roaming around the facility.
Starting us off with number 10 is the Villisca Axe Murder House. Do I even need to tell the story of this one? After hearing the name, I'm sure none none of you would even want to move in. But either way, located in Villisca in southwestern Iowa, the house was home to the Moore family, which included the parents Josiah and Sarah and their 4 children. On the 10th of June 1912, one of the children invited 2 friends to spend the night at the Moore house after a children's day at the church. They all got home at around 10 p.m. and that was that. The next day at 7 a.m, the Moores' neighbor Mary got worried because she didn't see any of the Moores do their morning chores. She knocked on the door and no one answered. Josiah's brother also tried opening the door after getting a call from Mary, but to no avail. Thankfully, he did have a spare key and he went inside. When he opened the guest bedroom door, he found the bodies of the 2 guests lying on their beds. He called the police immediately, and after investigation, it was found the entire family and the 2 friends were bludgeoned to death with an axe. Apparently, the killer or the killers had been waiting in the attic, and as soon as everyone fell asleep, they struck. Josiah was axed the most out of everyone. His face was so disfigured, even his eyes were missing. The blade was only used on him and the blunt part was used on the rest of the family. The culprit or the culprits were never found, and after that point, the home is considered one of the most haunted ones in America. People even pay $400+ to stay there for a single night. But these guests report hearing children's voices and seeing objects just fly across the room. A paranormal investigator even stayed there in 2014 and then stabbed himself after spending the night. Need I say more? Don't go there. Coming in at number 9 is Lemp Mansion. Located in St. Louis, Missouri, this mansion has seen its fair bit of tragedy, probably enough tragedy for a lifetime. The mansion has 33 rooms altogether and was built by William Lemp sometime in the 1860s. William and his wife had 4 sons, and after their youngest Frederick died, William ended up committing suicide in 1904 shortly after. So death count right now is 2, just keep that in mind. A few years later, William's wife died of cancer in the house, death count 3, and by 1922 William Jr. ended up shooting himself in the same room his dad committed suicide in, death count 4. If that honestly isn't horrible enough, in 1949 William's 3rd son Charles shot his dog in the basement of the house and then went up to his bedroom and killed himself. Death count, final, 6. The house ended up being sold the same year and turned into a boarding house when obviously the hauntings began. Honestly, that many people can't die in a house for there to be no hauntings. Safe to say you'll find me in no rush whatsoever to move into the Lemp Mansion. No thank you. At number 8 we have The Previous Tenant. Now this story was shared by an anonymous person, so sadly I can't give him credit, but the show must go on. Now this woman had just moved into her first apartment with her boyfriend, and then she heard the doorknob moving like someone was unlocking it. She didn't think anything of it since she just assumed it was her boyfriend that came home, but then she looked at the time. It was 8:30 p.m. and usually he was meant to come home at 10:30, so something just wasn't right. She looked out the window and she couldn't see his car or anything, and that's when she started to panic. Someone kept trying to open the door, but it wasn't working. A few minutes later they stuck some metal between the door to try and pry it open, and that failed as well. The girl was freaking out at that point like anyone would, and so she called 911 and hid in her bathroom with a knife. Good call, honestly, always arm yourself. I've never been in this position, but I would arm myself too. The person tried to pry the door open for at least 30 minutes before giving up, and when police got there they found an old man roaming the area with a crowbar and a knife. Apparently he was the old tenant of the apartment and he wanted all his stuff back that the new couples had apparently stole. They didn't steal anything, he was just very delusional, and if I was her in the bathroom I would literally be sending my last text messages to all my loved ones. Just imagine being at home, hearing someone trying to come into your house and kill you and take your stuff. Filling our number 7 slot is the Bell Witch Farm. Now this is more legend than it is confirmed, but I feel like there are just way too many intricate details in the story for it to just be mere folklore, but let me know what you guys think. Located in Robertson County, Tennessee, John Bell Sr. lived on his farm with his family, and this story focuses on just friendly neighborly war gone very wrong. Now John's neighbor Kate Batts believed he had cheated her out of quite a bit of land, and clearly she was determined to stay salty about it forever because while on her deathbed she promised to haunt John for the rest of her life and his. Soon after, the Bell family became the target of some of the worst haunting of all time. They would hear chains dragged across their floor, their servant would be followed by a massive black dog-looking apparition when he went to visit his wife. John saw a massive creature who he shot at, but then who disappeared into thin air. The family would hear the sound of gnawing on their beds, the growls of invisible dogs fighting. John even started being physically haunted when his mouth just started to paralyze itself at random times. The children were then attacked when the sheets were pulled from their beds and they were literally flipped out of their beds while asleep. Kate's ghost would just scratch the children, and she hated John's youngest daughter Betsy the most. She would slap her, stick pins into her, like it was a proper vengeance act. And all that for a bit of land. Like, Kate, you are dead. Please move on. Now at number 6 is the Joshua Ward House. Located in Essex County, the house belonged to Sheriff George the Strangler Corwin back in the day. And he may not ring a bell, but he was the high sheriff of the county during the Salem witch trials, and I feel like everyone knows what that is. He was known throughout the country to strangle the accused by tying necks and heels, which basically means he would force the person's body into hoops, and then he would rope their neck to their feet until blood came gushing out of their mouth and their nose. Everyone honestly hated this man. He even stoned an 80-year-old farmer to death who refused to stand trial for witchcraft. He's 80 years old. Anyway, 4 years later, George had a heart attack and died. His family was so scared a riot crowd would dismember his body that they interned his body in their house's cellar. The house is now a bed and breakfast called The Merchant and is apparently one of the most haunted houses in New England. And I'm not even surprised, this dude pissed off so many people and killed them in such gruesome ways. If I was one of his victims, I'd make sure no one enjoyed being in that house ever again. And since I'd be dead, I'd have forever to spend doing it. Coming in at number 5 is the Lizzie Borden House. Located in Fall River, Massachusetts, the house is home to the Borden family in the late 1800s. Lizzie's father Andrew and her stepmother Abby were found axed to death in the house, and Lizzie scandalously became the main suspect. Also, this is the second axe murder on the list, taking place in the 1800s. Like, why was axe such a weapon of choice back in the day? Such a brutal weapon. I feel like people who use axes really enjoy seeing the bloodshed. Anyway, I drifted off. Lizzie had a long and brutal trial, but she was acquitted of both murders and then later refused to live in her family home. Lizzie and her sister Emma moved into another house they named Maplecroft, and she lived there until she died. These days the house operates as a bed and breakfast, and funnily enough, the most requested room to lodge in is the room where Abby's body was found. You people are freaks! Apparently guests have heard a maid screaming for help late at night and the cackling of Lizzie. Her axed parents' ghosts are also known to wander around the property. If any of you guys been there, let me know. And why are all these murder houses being turned into bed and breakfasts? Surely there's better property than that. Surely. At number 4 is the House of Death, and I didn't even make up that title, that's actually what it's called, I swear to God. Located in Greenwich Village, New York, this house was constructed way back in the 1850s, and a record 22 people have died in this house. And yes, that means the house is also haunted by 22 ghosts, which is around 23 ghosts more than I'd like. Anyway, Mark Twain lived in the house at the beginning of the 1900s, and his ghost is said to be seen on the first floor near the staircase. The family home was turned into a 10-unit apartment building, and the first couple that moved in there felt a monstrous moving shadow looming over them at all times. The actress Jan Bartel, who felt the shadow, wrote a memoir about her experiences at the house, how she felt hands brushing her neck and this rotting odor that was just always present. She'd have visions of seeing people, and when the couple called a medium, the person felt many dead things under the floorboards, whether that was a dead girl or a cat perhaps, and after hearing that, the couple left very soon after. Former attorney Joel Steinberg moved into the place a few years later and beat his partner's 6-year-old daughter into a coma, after which she died. Residents have seen the ghosts of that little girl, another lady in white, another one in black, a grey cat, and just many, many more. Safe to say, unless these 22 ghosts are paying rent, I'm not sharing a house with them. Thank you, next. Filling our number 3 slot is the Los Feliz Mansion. Why do so many bad things happen at mansions? Like, do rich people just attract murder? I'm very confused. Anyway, the mansion is located on a hilltop in LA, and boy, oh boy, does it have a brutal past. During the 1950s, the mansion was owned by Dr. Harold Perelson, his wife, and their 3 children. On the night of December 6, 1959, something came over Harold that people are still unable to explain 50 years later. He went downstairs and and beat his wife to death with a hammer. He then moved on to one of his daughters and severely beat her too, but thankfully not to death. After these random acts of violence, Harold decided to commit suicide by drinking a mix of acid, water, and tranquilizer pills. After the horrific incident, the mansion was bought a year later as a storage site, but no one lived there for the next 50 years. Neighbors remember seeing the couple who bought the house move boxes into the mansion, but they never stayed the night. The couple's son Rudy inherited the house, and although he has no plans to sell it, he still has no plans to live there either. No one has been invited into the home after the murders, but trespassers and adrenaline junkies do come there. Like, they have picnics in the decaying garden. They've even tried to break in. And the real reason they want to see it is because the Perelsons' furniture is all still in there. Like, if you look through the window, you can see the 50s style TV, a Christmas tree with gifts underneath it, and it's just exactly the same as it was that fateful night, except covered in dust and death. Now, people speculate Harold did it because of financial troubles, while others say they found documents of him having been secretly hospitalized in his past. Whatever the case, his children actually survived the ordeal and haven't been in the media since. Not that you have the option to move into this house since it's owned by Rudy, I just wouldn't do it. Now at number 2 is the Kreischer Mansion. Now the mansion is located on Staten Island in New York and was built by German immigrant Balthasar Kreischer back in 1885. The house is a 2.5-story beauty. It has a bunch of verandas, decorative railings, tall chimneys. It's just very cute. Anyway, the man had 2 sons, Edward and Charles, and in 1894 Edward shot himself in his right temple, dying instantly. His ghost has been seen all over the property for decades, but it just gets worse than that. Now his ghost has been seen all over the property for decades, but it gets a lot worse. The family business burned down during the Great Depression and they lost everything. By 1998, the property was bought in order to be restored. It was sold again, and in 2005 a horrible mob killing took place inside the home. The caretaker of the home was found out to be a hitman for the Bonanno crime family, which was one of the major families in the American mafia at the time. Now the person killed was a rival mob associate called Robert McKelvey. Apparently Robert had a big mouth and owed one of the associates, Gino Galastro, a lot of money. He was lured to the Kreischer Mansion, and kudos to him, he put up quite a fight against the 5 people he was up against, one being Gino, who was also a mafia soldier. Don't even know what a mafia soldier is, didn't even know they existed. Either way, the 5 failed to strangle him to death, so they stabbed him, then dragged his body to the pond and then drowned him. They then dismembered his body with a hacksaw and incinerated all of it in the mansion's furnace. Now the owners of the mansion had no clue this had even happened. They were in the middle of developing the house into an assisted living center for old people and had recently replaced the furnace. That's so innocent, like I love how they just had no idea what was going on. Cute. And finally, at number 1 is the Menendez murder home. Other than the murder of Sharon Tate and Nicole Brown Simpson, this is probably one of the biggest Hollywood murder cases ever. And honestly, not that I know who Jose and Kitty Menendez were since they were before my time, but I'm sure a lot of you probably do. Now Jose was a self-made Cuban millionaire and the executive vice president at an independent film company. The couple and their sons Eric and Lyle were renting a house in Beverly Hills while renovations were being done on their actual home. Now the 2-story house has 9,000 square feet of living space and takes up just about half an acre of land. It has a private tennis court, it has pools, a 2-story guest house, and Elton John even rented it at one point. On the night of August 20th, 1989, 2 suspects entered the home with a shotgun and shot Jose and Kitty to death. The culprits? None other than their 2 sons Eric and Lyle. Now it said Jose was very demanding of his sons, making them meet impossible standards, and Kitty was suffering from an array of things: depression, drug addiction, and alcoholism. The brothers were sentenced to life in prison for the murders, and their trial was highly publicized on TV. The brothers had had run-ins with the law before, but since their dad basically shat money, it was never a problem. Described as a sociopath, Lyle had a horrible temper and a mean streak, and he was apparently the mastermind behind it all. Eric, on the other hand, was sensitive and quiet, and he's actually the one who confessed to his therapist about the murder. During the 6 months after the murders, the brothers spent $1 million of their parents' money just partying away. Eventually, Eric's therapist told his girlfriend about the murders, who then told the police. Took you long enough. During their trials, the brothers said their parents abused them, but there was little to no evidence of that. I know that was a lot more detail than necessary, but I just found the case so interesting. Like, what would possess you to shoot your own parents when they could give you everything you ever wanted? Even if they couldn't, why would you shoot your own parents?